1, 2. Morning. Good morning to you, Chief Constable, to your senior team, to you, Director General, and to those watching online and present with us in the room. Slightly earlier start today, but you're all very welcome to this July accountability meeting in public. In the first part of today's meeting, we'll take your report, Chief Constable, and arising questions, and then we'll move to you, Director General, for your report on the work of the National Crime Agency. But before we begin business, we record condolences on the passing of former Vice Chair and Board Member Tom Frawley. He was a dedicated public servant through many roles, and during his time at the board, he helped shape and further the reforms to our policing service using his considerable skills. Our thoughts are with all who knew and worked with him. Chief Constable, it's just over 3 weeks on from the disorder and violence that followed the appalling attack on Stephen Ogilvie. And I would like to place on record again the board's thanks to all those in the PSNI and the other emergency services who responded to that violence. It is shameful that 49 officers were injured, and we wish all a speedy recovery. I have written to thank Joe Farrell, Police Scotland's Chief Constable, for providing mutual aid support to the PSNI at such short notice. Operational support that was essential, as the PSNI didn't have the capacity to sustain a continuing adequate response to the disorder, a position that once again brings sharp focus on the resourcing of policing. The policing cost of this disorder is estimated at £5 million, and we thank the Secretary of State for securing £4 million towards that cost. But that still leaves a gap, which we'll add to the £57 million funding shortfall for this year. We hope that in the reported current executive discussions with the Secretary of State and Treasury, that policing is top of that agenda, both in respect of current day funding and in respect of legacy costs. Today, Chief Constable, we have some follow-up questions in relation to the disorder, on organisation and orchestration of the disorder, on follow-up arrests and charges, as these send a strong message that there will be consequences, and on whether those arrested were participants or organisers, and also action taken against those inciting hate and violence online. Chief Constable, we are approaching a busy summer period for policing, so if I can ask you to update on preparedness for that. And in that context, noting an upcoming change in the terrorism legislation regarding the display of prescribed material and flags, we will have a question on the policing approach which will be adopted to that. And finally, just to note that as a board, we continue to remain focused on action to tackle violence against women and girls. We will be meeting with Rachel Langdale today to discuss her report on the PSNI approach in this area and the internal culture within PSNI. And we look forward to receiving your implementation plan on taking forward the recommendations made within the Langdale and MLA reports. Chief Constable, I invite you to make some opening remarks, and then we will move to questions.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. So this is the third year in a row where I come before you in the aftermath of atrocious violence and racism, which has once again shown Northern Ireland in a shameful light. The brutal knife attack against Stephen Ogilvie on the 8th of June shocked all of us, and there's no justification for the wanton violence and destruction which then followed. I met Stephen's family, and their courage, their humanity, calling for calm when their loved one was so grievously hurt, stood in stark contrast to those thugs and cowards who put on masks and took to the streets to attack our communities. I commend those who intervened that night and our officers who arrived so quickly to arrest the suspect and administer first aid to Stephen. This was an incredibly traumatic incident, with images of the attack shown around the world, but the suspect was immediately arrested and is now the subject of a criminal justice process, which is the proper way to address such disturbing crimes, following the rule of law, not mob rule. On the Tuesday evening, we witnessed scenes of serious disorder and violence not experienced in Northern Ireland for many years. Yet again, the PSNI and our fire and ambulance colleagues had to evacuate terrified families, many with young children. Our emergency services saved lives that night. In one instance, children aged 6 and 8 were rescued from a house where their father was hiding them in a loft. In another instance, a 2-month-old baby was rescued. As you mentioned, 49 officers were injured during the disorder. Some examples: an inspector in the local policing team was taken to hospital for smoke inhalation and facial burns from a petrol bomb. The constable in operational planning was struck on the head by masonry, resulting in concussion. A number of officers received concussion. Another officer, ordinarily based in our contact management centre, sustained a significant jaw injury. And a local police officer in Coleraine sustained a head injury when masonry cracked open his helmet. The other injuries were all very similar. I've spoken to each of the injured officers to thank them for what they did. We owe these officers and their families a huge debt of gratitude. And for the third year, I was forced to request mutual aid support to keep people safe, simply because, as you've mentioned, Chair, we do not have sufficient numbers of officers. I cannot envisage another police service in the United Kingdom being put in this position, required to deal with such repeated violent disorder and wider post-conflict policing challenges, and yet, over years, to be stripped of its police officer numbers. Amid the chaos and fear, we were not able to reach, help, or call back everyone who needed us. For people who called us during the disorder and we did not have the resources to reach you, I am truly sorry. But we had no option other than to prioritise the saving of lives. I know that some healthcare workers were left fearful as they tried to get to work. I can only imagine the trauma experienced by those incredible health workers as they courageously sought to actually go to work. Disappointingly, such stories distract from the thuggery and violence perpetrated by racist idiots. We should all be focused on the collective bravery of our emergency services and our health workers during those difficult nights. Our engagement with health colleagues immediately afterwards has been very positive, and I'm grateful to them for this. The First and Deputy First Minister, Justice Minister, and you, Chair, accompanied me at a press conference calling for calm and peaceful protest. Many did peacefully protest, and various community leaders sought to ensure that the evening did not result in disorder. I want to acknowledge and recognise those individuals and those groups. However, many people had only one objective in mind, that of mindless violence. We should all remember that many of the staff, health workers, nurses and doctors who will have cared for Stephen, and indeed who care for all of us, come to Northern Ireland from overseas and are the very people that these thugs sought to attack and intimidate. It's incumbent on everyone to stand up to racism and such violence. We must not let the recent event simply pass and hope that nothing like it happens again. We need to take steps to protect society from such scenes. Much needs to be done. A major part of that is having a properly resourced police service. We need an executive-led, cross-party approach to understand and address the causes of this repeated racist violence. Most of those involved in the violence came prepared to riot. They were masked and dressed in black and warned those with cameras to stay away in efforts to hinder our investigation. Such actions will not succeed. We've made 35 arrests so far. The day after the disorder, we published the first image of a suspected rioter. 15 sets of images have now been published. Anyone who is involved in the disorder can look forward to an early morning knock at the door. I would appeal to anyone with information about those responsible. It is not too late. Please contact the PSNI or Crime Stoppers. Chair, there's been speculation about paramilitary involvement. It is clear that members of loyalist paramilitary groups were present at some disorder and were involved in directing the violence at a number of locations, including East Belfast. But the picture is inconsistent with regards to paramilitary involvement. There are indications that after the first night, some paramilitary groups tried to dissuade their members from becoming involved in further disorder, whilst others did not. Coordination of the disorder was primarily driven online by individuals from different communities, both loyalist and Republican, from across Northern Ireland and beyond. People travelled across Northern Ireland, Great Britain and Ireland in order to engage in protest and disorder. The Westminster government support of £4 million additional for funding is welcome. However, with costs for the disorder currently estimated now at 5.4 million, the remaining gap must be absorbed by our police budget. The true cost extends beyond financial expenditure. It's reflected in officers and staff being diverted from the services that communities rely upon every day. Another example, beyond those officers injured who should have been on other duties, is of detectives being taken off the terrorist investigation into the Dunmurry and Lurgan bomb attacks in order to police the disorder. My accountability report provides more detail of the impact of reduced funding. This is a view not simply of your Chief Constable, but it's shared by our independent oversight bodies, including the Ombudsman, the Independent Reporting Commission, the Criminal Justice Inspectorate, and the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee. Recent political support for our recovery business case was welcome. However, despite this, we are facing projected funding deficits of 57 million, 92 million, and 149 million over the next 3 years. The PSNI funding challenge is compounded further by Northern Ireland's unique legacy responsibilities. We continue to have substantial obligations of some £24 million each year arising from the past, which we should not be funding from our contemporary budget. That legacy burden will increase considerably due to outstanding civil cases. I'm leading a police service with no agreed budget for the current year, let alone future years. And I have significant concerns about our ability to meet the target of 7,000 officers by 2028 set out in the recovery business case. We must meet this target. I've made that clear to the First and Deputy First Minister. I need the support of the Executive to achieve this. The question facing Northern Ireland is not whether policing matters. The events of last month and previously have emphasised the criticality of policing in Northern Ireland. The question is whether policing will be funded in a way that reflects its importance and will enable the PSNI to do the job that society demands. Turning to the conviction of Jeffrey Donaldson last week. It's important that public commentary and journalism concerning allegations of rape and serious sexual offending recognise the integrity of the criminal justice process, particularly when proceedings have not concluded and the possibility of appeal remains. I of course understand the public interest, but the commentary has been utterly irresponsible. I want to make clear that the first allegations against Jeffrey Donaldson were made to the PSNI in March 2024. He was arrested 3 weeks later. I want to put on record my appreciation of the professionalism of our specialist team in Public Protection Branch. I cannot speak highly enough of them. This conviction demonstrates to victims everywhere that no one is above the law, no matter an abuser's public profile or role. We will investigate matters sympathetically and professionally. I hope others who've suffered any abuse by anyone will have the confidence to come forward. I appeal to you directly to do so. I particularly want to pay the highest tribute to the two victims in this case. I do not think any of us will ever be able to appreciate the courage and selflessness that it took to come forward. They are remarkable and special people, and they're an example to us all. The victims are finding the current media frenzy and wild speculation incredibly difficult to handle. I'm aware that journalists have tried to reach out to the victims. That must stop. They do not wish to speak to the media, and everyone must respect the authority of the ongoing court process. The law affords lifelong anonymity to complainants in sexual offence cases. Great care should be taken to ensure reporting does not undermine confidence in the justice process or discourage victims and survivors from engaging with investigations and future proceedings. I remind everyone that publicly identifying a victim of a sexual offence is of itself a criminal offence. We are actively investigating social media posts in connection with this trial. Claims of blackmail by the government and surveillance against Jeffrey Donaldson are unfounded. These did not happen. To those who make such claims on the back of the courage of two incredibly brave victims, I ask that you act responsibly and stop such wild speculation. Finally, it's important I mention that our officers continue to respond to tragedy on our roads. 36 people have now died on our roads this year, 4 in the last week alone. This is an increase of over 55% on the same period of last year. The decisions taken by some drivers are inexplicable. It's my officers who have to attend these horrendous scenes and deliver the heartbreaking news to families of a loved one being killed or receiving life-changing injuries. I want to end on a note of positivity by congratulating the 4 colleagues who were recognised in the King's Birthday Honours, receiving awards for their distinguished service, dedication and commitment to policing and public safety. Their commitment to serving and protecting all of our communities exemplifies the best of policing. And before taking questions, Chair, I echo your introductory remarks about the sad passing of Tom Frawley. And we in the PSNI all send our condolences to his family. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Chief Constable. Our first question is from Peter Osborne in relation to the recent disorder.
Thanks, Chair. Can I also echo the thanks to the police officers who responded to all of that disorder, those women and men who help protect communities. But can I also, and I think as you touched on, Chief Constable, thank and acknowledge the care provided by so many people within the emergency services and in hospitals. And a reminder, about a third of those people were not born on these islands, but have come here to work. And like everybody else, and the vast majority of people who come here to work pay taxes to sustain policing, as well as areas around housing and social welfare and so on. So thanks and acknowledgement to them for the taxes that they pay. You say it's the 3rd year. It is, and it's both what happened, I think, shamed us all. It is shameful. And people are still frightened about what might happen in the future. So while it's the 3rd year, I think there's an anticipation that there may be further trouble in years to come. And I just want to ask you whether that is your reading of the situation, first of all. But secondly, I don't believe these riots were not orchestrated. I think there was orchestration, even if that was at local level. And I think a really important part in response to that orchestration is to deter people. And so can I ask you, what is happening with those, not just who were caught rioting, but those who orchestrated this trouble at a local level? Because one of the greatest deterrents is that people who do these things see and feel consequence to it. I think also we hear about social media and people coming from outside Northern Ireland. I'm sure that's right. But that cannot happen with the state being helpless to prevent it happening. So again, in preparation for what may or may not be coming down the line, which hopefully won't be anything, but there may be, what is the PSNI or indeed NCA, when we come to it, doing to prevent that social media orchestration or encouragement of rioting, and the travelling of people to this part of the world to help that rioting happen or to promote it. Surely we're not helpless to prevent that sort of orchestration from players and bad actors outside Northern Ireland too.
Thank you, Peter. There's two or three things there, and I'm going to bring colleagues in, particularly probably Ryan and David. But just regarding the future, if I may, we're facing it's obviously the beginning of July. We have the 11th night bonfires, the 12th July parades. We've got Scarver, we've got the Flower, we've got a lot coming up. And I know there have been huge concerns by many who would be attending those events with regards to what we saw on the 9th and 10th of June. What I will say, and it's important I say this, on the Friday evening, that week I was out Belfast each evening. On the Friday evening, as part of the Belsonic events, there were a number of concerts happening. I wish the Sky helicopter had been in the air because it was a wonderful, safe, peaceful Friday evening in Belfast. It was unrecognisable from the scenes that we'd seen before. This is an incredible place and a safe place to visit. What happened this year, last year, and indeed in 2024, we have got to work harder collectively in almost a whole systems approach, and I referenced it in my introductory remarks, I think from the executive level down, to properly examine the causes for this, to address them. With regards to the events this summer, we are accustomed to dealing with these set pieces. We have extremely good intelligence feeds, and we are well connected on the ground with regards to community tensions. We are confident that these events will be family focused and will be safe. But I do ask everybody, because the smallest trigger can cause people, and we've seen it here now for 3 years, to go into a wave of criminality and disorder. And it's not just on the police to deal with the consequence of that through deterrence and arrest and prosecution. It's a whole societal approach about where are your kids, where are your young people, what are they doing, when something suddenly comes from nowhere in the media that could have happened in Northern Ireland, it could have happened in Great Britain, it could have happened in the south of Ireland, it could have happened elsewhere, that we can see might cause an unnecessary and criminal response. There's a responsibility on all of us for that. With regards to the online activity and the calling out of paramilitaries, I made clear when these events occurred that we won't shy away from doing that. We will be very open in public commentary about what we find. The investigation is still ongoing, particularly with events online. I have been very clear in my opening remarks around the involvement of paramilitaries, including paramilitary leaders at some seats of the disorder. And anything that we establish through the ongoing investigations, arrests and prosecutions will be made known either through the criminal justice process or through my commentary at this board. With regards to specifically the work online and working, if I may say, with those network providers who provide the platforms, we do work with them to take down misinformation as quickly as we possibly can, because it's the misinformation that young minds seem to go to without checking the accuracy of what's being said that can cause a completely disproportionate and criminal response. And we are well embedded with those organisations because of the history here to do everything we can to police the activity that's happening there that gives rise to false information. Ryan Henderson is the gold overall for the events coming up on the 11th to 12th of July. With your permission, Chair, I just want to ask Ryan to provide some reassurances around the planning for the reassurance of communities and to answer the question around the forthcoming events.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chief. Thanks, Peter. I'll touch firstly, I think, on the disorder from the policing perspective. So this is the third year of the disorder, and as you'd expect, each year we go through the process of debriefing and trying to learn from it. And I hope you've noticed, and I hope our community saw this year. So the disorder 3 years ago probably lasted and sustained for over a week. Ballymena and Portadown last year, similarly up to about 10 days. Over those two significant periods of disorder in the previous years, we understood quickly the benefits of getting people arrested quickly, getting images out there quickly, getting strong deterrence messages. And you saw this year we were able to mobilise quickly, get arrests made quickly, get images out quickly. There were strong messages put out from ourselves and others calling for calm, but also identifying consequences would follow, as well, of course, the incredibly impacted message from the family saying none of the disorder was in their name. And I think together all of that saw within 48 hours the disorder come to an end. So I just want to give some reassurance to our communities about our preparedness and what we've learned over recent years in terms of being able to get ourselves really front-footed in terms of responding to the disorder, also in use of our tactics as well. So you will have seen those who watch the television cameras, the use of water cannon, AEP and proactive public order tactics in relation to that. Looking at the summer ahead, so the summer's not a surprise to us. A number of these events are events that we've dealt with for many years. The Chief highlighted a few. We've got, of course, the weekend coming up of the 11th bonfires and parading on the which is this year on the 13th because the 12th falls on the Sunday. The Scarva event parade on the 14th of the month. The Flower, it's been mentioned. Huge number of concerts across the summer. The Apprentice Boys of Derry up in Derry at the start of August, and then the last Saturday event. So lots on as always, but the planning for those has been going on for some time, and the plans are set in relation to them, working with organisers, working with local communities to help us with that. This year, as you rightly point out, we're acutely aware of the potential for overlap or hijacking of some of those events by people who are set on causing disorder. The intelligence picture we're getting, both what we see online and the build up to it, isn't painting that picture alongside it, but I worry, as I'm sure many do around the table, about something that might trigger a reaction and using those events as a platform to do it. I guess to help us all get a handle on that through the work of our strategic community engagement team and the other engagement that we do locally, I think we have great mechanisms to test the temperature, assess community tensions, and start to give us some insight into that as tensions may or may not grow. But just suffice to say, we're very alert to that, Peter. Maybe touch on, Chief, if you were going to around the, I guess, the cross-governmental approach to, so what is the plan in responding to that? Happy to do that if you have time.
Yeah, do. Right.
Chief, happy?
Yeah.
So I was really acutely aware and felt that kind of sense of duty very deeply during the week of the disorder, that many parts of government and the bodies connected into them were looking to us as the police effectively to give them a sense of security to get back to doing what they needed to do, be that businesses within the city, be that schools, be that other parts of Northern Ireland society. And the civil contingency arrangements were stood up in relation to do that, to help us all to manage that collectively. I know from colleagues within the executive that there's a desire to see what we can learn from that, what can be done better. It was a huge demand for information to help support people. And I think we'll all reflect collectively what could we do differently, should we see that again? How do we deal with issues of people displaced from homes, for example, how they're looked after, incredible work done by the voluntary sector on the ground across that. How do we all collectively harness that? The Chief and I have talked about prompting that discussion with governmental colleagues so that we learn from this year. We've learned from what's happened the previous years, and we're all really well prepared collectively should this happen again.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, can I just mention, sorry, very quickly, I've written to Jane Brady with regards to the response strategically. We've had conversations previously, but I think there is some real learning to be done around the management at strategic level of these national emergencies, if I can describe them like that, when they occur. There is an important element as well, just to reassure Peter around the investigation. I think it's a public interest relevance that on the 29th of June, we arrested an individual in relation to the glider bus that was set on fire in Newtonards Road and a house in McMaster Street, both incidents on the 9th of June. He was arrested on suspicion of attempted murder and 2 counts of arson with intent to endanger life. He was charged and he went to court on the 30th of June. There was no application for bail, and he will appear via video link on the 28th of July. If I could, Chair, just ask David to mention very briefly around...
Just before David does, because he may come in on this next question. If that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Gerry, you want to ask?
Thank you, Chair. And it's just really the order to go back to the paramilitary issue. Just let me say, first of all, to agree with what we said about the 49 officers. I hope that they are either really recovered or are recovering at this time. You also mentioned, I think in your report, that there's 20 suspects and 35 or 36 arrests. Let me welcome that as well. I just want, and I've already spoken to some senior officers around the first statement that went out. It was an answer to your question, I think, which was asked. And what worries me is that the impression of it was that, because I think the statement said something very like, we've no evidence of paramilitary involvement, became something which I think looked absolutely naive. You said yourself that you have plenty of intelligence in terms of these organisations, and certainly loyalists were involved. Albeit I accept that you're saying in some areas they were, in some areas they were not in terms of that. But I think even when the commissioner, the children's commissioner, said that there was evidence coming in. By the way, I got evidence as well. Just anecdotally from people. People know each other. These are tight, especially in North Belfast and all that. And people were able to tell me that there were UDA people there who were mixing with young people, pushing them forward. They themselves weren't forward, but they were there to do that. So I'm worried that there's if there is a reluctance to call out the paramilitaries when they are involved in this, because, and I think you touched on it as well, I know there's stuff coming in from outside here, from America, Britain, all of that. I know the social media, the right wing and the social media are very active and all of that there, but it doesn't go until an empty vessel. There are people there who are taking this and using this as an excuse, and the attack of Mr. Ogilvie is a perfect example of it. So that is organised, but it isn't entirely. While it's a part of it, it is here where the paramilitaries are involved that I think just needs to be called out. It is a flip side. Racism is a flip side of sectarianism. And people were saying that some of the images of the immigrants, and by the way, again, to the blue light systems, and also the detached youth and all of that, they were doing huge amounts of work. So I want to say that to them as well. But, you know, can you speak a wee bit more on that? Because that's the worry. It's not that it comes every now and again, that it's something which triggers it off. But there is clearly racism there. And there are people who are anti-immigrants who are involved in it. Thank you.
So firstly, I want to be really clear, and if the board don't realise this yet about me, then, well, I don't know what to say to that. I will not shy away from calling out anything that happens. There is no reluctance on my part. I won't sensationalise things, I'll be factual. And that's what I've done from the start here. I was asked the questions about paramilitaries the first morning. I genuinely, and there's no statement from me to say there's no evidence. What I said is, it's too early to know. It's too early to say we're investigating this. And I explained in my earlier remarks that anything that we find with regards to anybody involved in these awful crimes who are connected in any way with paramilitary groups, we will describe that. We are not going to shy away from it. And I've described that people from both Republican and Loyalist communities we're calling for this to happen online. So this is a societal challenge. That's why I'm talking about the executive at senior level. We need to do some really sort of careful work to understand how we stop this in the future. Otherwise, it will happen again and again. And we've got to make sure that we approach this collectively. And we will call it out, I promise you. And we will call it out. I think it would help to bring Davey in. It will probably build on my answer. And obviously, he really has probably got some input with regards to Peter's original question, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. And I suppose just to pick up on that point and to be absolutely clear, who was involved in the orchestrating, the organising, the coordinating of the disorder remains a real focus for us, and we will call it out. And just to emphasise again what the Chief said in his opening remarks, we are certain that members of lawless paramilitary prescribed organisations were at a number of sites of the disorder and were involved in directing disorder at a number of those locations, including East Belfast. So I think that's as clear as we can put it. There were a number of drivers in terms of why people turned out onto the streets, as the Chief has said, and some of that was driven by online activity and commentary. But clearly we've made it clear in terms of our stance in respect of that paramilitary involvement as well, and hopefully that provides that clarity around that issue. In terms of the investigation, Peter's point is absolutely right. We will continue to work on the investigation and to bring people before the courts. Thus far, 35 people have been arrested. We have devoted significant resource to the investigation of offences coming from the disorder. That investigations team is led by a Detective Chief Inspector, but supported by 46 officers made up of detectives and local policing colleagues as well. And those officers are working through in a methodical and a detailed way the examination in terms of CCTV, arrest and processing, file building and court teams. And again, to this point, out of those 35 people that have been arrested, 27 of those have been overnight charged and were before the courts within hours, and that work will continue. And the Chief has emphasised, this goes right up to the suspected offences of attempted murder and arson, endangering life, really serious offences that we will continue to investigate. But in terms of the wider planning moving ahead, I would just summarise that in that we are providing that intelligence support to the planning of all the operations over the next number of days and weeks. And we are maximising our reach in terms of social media sites, online commentary, etc., to ensure that we have as much warning as possible in terms of those trigger issues and incidents. We're also liaising with the UK government in terms of the engagement with social media providers and companies, and we have spoken directly to a number of those providers ourselves. And we are investigating, again, that online element, primarily around offences in respect of the Communications Act offences around improper use of public electronic communications network. And we have learned over the last experience over the last 3 years in terms of the importance of that digital intelligence and information, and we continue to try to identify accounts, individuals and groups that are suspected of involvement in incitement and encouraging any forms of protests and violence in the streets that we have seen. That's unacceptable.
Thank you.
So, sorry, Chair, only because Chris was mentioned, the Children's Commissioner. So obviously to help with regards to the meeting and those watching, Chris Quinn, who I have a great relationship with, I see Chris, and Ryan Henderson's been in touch with Chris. Chris reported that young people, one particular example, had been coerced to be involved in the disorder on the basis that a £500 debt would be cleared. We're very much in touch with Chris around that. And that was Chris's direct position around paramilitary's operation on the ground. So we're very much connected with all of that. Last thing, and I know Peter mentioned this, we were concerned about a number of emerging tensions with regards to a repeat of what we saw in August of 2024 and of June of 2025. So we had a meeting arranged with a significant number of community leaders in advance of the awful events of the 9th and 10th of June, which was arranged for the 11th of June, which you, Chair, the Deputy Chair and the Chief Executive attended at Dunsilley. where we met a number of community leaders to talk about concerns with regards to the summer. And I have to say, you were at the meeting, the reaction with regards to the engagement and the confidence in policing was extremely positive. And it's something that we shouldn't take for granted because it doesn't exist across policing to those degrees. So the communities were very reassured about what we're doing. And it was heartwarming to hear how they feel confident in the response that they get from the PSNI, but they are scared. And I know people have left Northern Ireland because of the events of that week. I only hope they come back. This was a awful series of incidents over 2 nights that we've got to do everything we possibly can to prevent in the future. And that's not with the PSNI, that's with all of us.
Thank you. Next question is from Nuala McAllister.
Thank you for the answers so far. My question is really asking if you want to comment on the issues that were raised in public around protesters asking people for ID to let them through, and these are mostly healthcare workers. I know that Ryan Henderson and I have spoken about this, but is there anything that you would like to say to reassure the public about being able to actually get to work, and that it wasn't the police enabling, if that's the case, protesters?
Now, firstly, thanks for the question, Nuala, because obviously it was a subject of some reporting in the media. If I may, I'm just going to ask Ryan, because he's been working on this. I know he's spoken to you, just to make some comments, and I'll have a finishing comment after that. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Thanks. The first thing to say is on the Tuesday night, we saw, and people have seen images of people having been taken from their homes and rescued, and some of those people are healthcare workers. So on the Wednesday, in my kind of public messaging, I spoke about how we stand shoulder to shoulder with our healthcare colleagues who are keeping our loved ones healthy within and caring for them in our community, in nursing homes, hospitals, GP surgeries, and condemn that in the strongest possible terms. Probably in the Thursday morning, reports started circulating in the media around health workers having been asked to show identification by vigilantes, in effect, as they went to work at hospitals, and also reports saying that police officers had advised and told healthcare workers to show identification as they were getting into hospital. So clearly on hearing about that, I wanted to try and learn a bit more around what might have happened so we could try and understand it a bit better. So I arranged that day on the Thursday, a meeting with representatives from the health trust to a senior level, and sort of senior nursing colleagues within Belfast. That was a really good meeting. I spoke also with Unison and the Royal College of Nursing as well, just to kind of get their sense of it. Primarily, really to provide reassurance and see what more we could do, given we really understood how particularly healthcare workers from visible minority groups would be feeling nervous and worried and concerned about going to work. So a very positive meeting in that regard. From that meeting, and I think actually board colleagues, certainly I know Nuala, you have had some communication from staff who worked in the Mater. We've been able to identify that we think it happened around the Mater Hospital on the Tuesday night and the first night. I've also got from the Health Trust have kindly shared with me the details of a couple of colleagues from the Mater Hospital who I'm arranging to meet with just to hear about their experience. I think it's worth, so you get a better understanding of what might have happened and what did happen tonight, just a bit of the context of the Tuesday night. So I think you'll all know that it was an incredibly challenging, busy and terrible night across Greater Belfast, with multiple seats of disorder, violence and damage happening across the city and beyond. The Silver Commander on that night was saying on the CCTV and other feeds, multiple occasions with large crowds gathering, some peaceful protests, but some serious disorder, fires and a really escalating risk. At one point there were several fires, as you'll be aware, across the city. It meant we had to make some really difficult decisions, really prioritising saving people's lives. And that really was driving our decision making and what we were doing. Some of the key interventions we did have to do in the night was supporting the fire service and getting to places that were on fire, rescuing people from them. You might have seen that we were put a family with 2 kids in the back of a police Land Rover, a terrible sight to have to take them to safety. We cleared, so there were a number of roads that were blocked. One of my kind of strategic priorities was trying to keep our hospitals open and keep them working and keep the major roads clear. And we did our very best to do that. You might remember the M2, M3 West Link was blocked by protesters, and we had to use public order tactics to clear them off the road there. We did get some reports of vigilantes asking healthcare workers or demanding ID from them in and around the falls. We intervened there. That was one of the images you might have seen of a police officer getting hit in the head with masonry whilst doing that. Over the course of the chief has said 49 officers injured, water cannon utilised. I think there were 20 AEP rounds fired over the 2 days. So really, significant disorder and difficult decision making. And I say that just to give you a context of what actually happened then on the night. So to the best of our kind of understanding of it, based on what we've got from colleagues in healthcare and talking to your own folk, I'll try and summarise it. So during the evening, we deployed resources to the M2, M3 junction that I'd mentioned to you. Trying to shift that protest that was blocking the motorway. A couple of colleagues who were going to be deployed to that were deployed just at the West Link, where you would come off the junction of Carlisle Circus up to the Mater Hospital. And those 2 officers saw at Carlisle Circus and the junction a pretty significant protest there, a peaceful one, but protest. A fairly large number starting to block the road up there. So they went and spoke to them, left their kind of point, which was trying to divert traffic, went and spoke to that group, kind of ascertain what they were doing, and gauged them to be peaceful in the main, big, and then went back to do the duty that they were doing, given the fact we were trying to manage all those different priorities at the time. When they'd gone back to it, they were approached by some healthcare workers who were saying, we need to get to the hospital, it's change over time. And the officers then went and spoke to the crowd and said, people need to get through here to the hospital. And they were told, yes, healthcare workers can get through, no problem. So they then went back, spoke to healthcare workers and said, you'll get through there okay. One of the healthcare colleagues said to one of them, if I show them a pass, that'd be okay. And they went, like, you'll get through there okay. And by and large, that's what happened. Other officers who are working in and around the matter, when asked similar questions, when they were stopped by healthcare workers travelling to the hospital, when our folk were doing the other thing, said, you'll be able to get into the hospital okay. And that's really broadly what we think happened on the night. But what's my kind of take on that? We want to keep the hospitals going. The 2 officers involved, I think, made what was a pretty pragmatic and practical approach to trying to keep the hospital open by engaging with what was a peaceful protest. Given all of the other stretching resources, I think they managed that practically. But I absolutely get, if you're a healthcare worker and you're going through a big crowd of people like that, given what's happening in the rest of the city, and you're not used to seeing this kind of thing, it would have been, disturbing and worrying. And I absolutely acknowledge that. I also acknowledge that to people who didn't know what was happening, what we were doing. I think you used the word enabling, Nuala. People could read that the wrong way, which was that we were effectively working alongside vigilantes in that. Like the officers saying, at no point did they say to healthcare staff, you should go and show your pass there. We're telling you to do that. And people got through. They got through safely. The hospital kept going. But I absolutely just want to commend our healthcare staff who did that, kept the Mater Hospital opening. And I wouldn't want this to become the story of actually what we together have done with our colleagues in healthcare in order to support staff who were affected by the disorder. So we've been able to do lots of really good drop-in sessions, crime prevention sessions at hospitals. Had a really good session with the independent care sector, so pharmacies and nursing homes, other care providers who I spoke to, and got a real sense of just their nervousness and being able to give them good information about reporting crime, around crime prevention. Through the RCN, we've got a session upcoming specifically for nursing staff from visible minority communities and minority communities, again, to help support them. So I actually think there's been some really positive work done, but I absolutely don't want to take away from or diminish the experience of those who did have to walk through that crowd at the Matter to get into their work. But I hope I've given you some context about what happened and why.
Sorry, Chair, just very quickly. So I think in summary, when I probed into this, I heard the story. There was nothing with regards to any instruction for officers for people to show ID to masked men. But I know there's been so much commentary on this. By the way, I welcome the appointment of the new Ombudsman, Jackie Durkin. And I think there's likely to be, a review of this by Jackie. And I'm conscious of that. Any lessons we can learn, we will learn. But this was extraordinary night. And I cannot explain that all those officers will remember it for the rest of their service because of what they faced, as will those health workers. This isn't about the health workers and the police. This is about those awful criminals who created a situation that we have got to do everything we can to prevent in the future. Okay.
Thank you. We're going to move on to other policing matters now. It was important to give plenty of time to this particular issue in terms of the violence and disorder some weeks ago. But in terms of the number of questions that we've got and the time that we have remaining, if I could just encourage just one answer to each of the questions. And the first one is from Linda Dillon.
Thank you. I have a question, but before I ask the question, I would like to just make a comment around the commentary around officers being taken away from the investigation around Dunmurry and Lurgan. And I don't want to minimise what happened in Dunmurry and Lurgan because it's very serious and I wouldn't want to see officers being taken away from those investigations. But in 25-26, there were 31,500 domestic abuse incidents. There were 11 homicides that had a domestic abuse element to them. So I think maybe in terms of how it impacts the community, that might be what we want to be referencing in terms of where officers are being taken away from. I'm just saying that as a point. Okay. The question,
Linda, we also had to take officers away from public protection duties, just so you know.
Yeah, and I understand that, and that's why I think that's the point that should be made because it has such a wide impact on the community. The question I want to ask is a number of years ago, I think it's about 5 or 6 years ago now, there was a case raised with us and it was raised in the public arena. So I'm not saying anything that wasn't out there publicly by a PSNI staff member, Sinead McGrathy, and she was gaslit and her experiences minimised at the time when she talked about how she had been treated after making an allegation of unwanted sexual harassment. And I want reassurance that now, because at that time Sinead, as the victim, was moved from her position and the alleged perpetrator was then moved to where she was, which was totally unacceptable. And I want some reassurance that given the issues that have come up this week and previously around reports and incidents, that that is no longer happening. Firstly, that alleged victims are not the people who are being moved or repositioned. And secondly, that where there's an alleged perpetrator still working within PSNI staff or officers, that they are not being put in a position where that victim is then placed in the same working environment as them. So just some reassurance around that is no longer happening.
So firstly, I don't know Sinead's case. I apologise, Linda. I'm very happy to meet Sinead and talk to you about this case after this meeting. Coincidentally, yesterday I had an email, which I want to be very sort of careful about how I describe, about me meeting 3 female officers around historical challenges that they faced in the organisation, one of whom has now left, but has applied to come back because things are perhaps happening in a way that they feel more supported. You know that and you'll be hearing from Rachel Langdale during the private session, we've done a huge amount, and Davy Beck, as the ACC, has been responsible for managing and progressing the actions both from Rachel Langdale's report and the Melia report, which we'll report back to this board intermittently. I met with 50 sergeants this week. I'm seeing all the first line supervisors. And one of the things I talk about is the fast track hearings that I chair with regards to inappropriate conduct of all sorts, not simply sexism or misogyny, but of all sorts. But I give specific examples where I make it very clear that we will not accept unacceptable behaviour, because a lot of it, I think, can be properly addressed by those first line supervisors with regards to tone and culture and standards and expectations. In one of those cases that I talk about, the victim statement, and I've seen the victim, when she reported an assault, was that the section supported the officer and not her. And I make it very clear to those supervisors that is not what will happen. That is not what can happen. And I think there has been, and you will have heard it, I hope, over the last couple of years, and from all of the conversations we've had going back to the Katie Simpson case, and I met another family to do with the Katie Simpson case only this weekend, that there is an absolute commitment from everybody on this side of the table and this organisation to make sure we address any such concerns as you've just registered. So I'm very happy to meet Sinead. I'm meeting lots of different ex-members of the PSNI and serving members of the PSNI to make sure we get this right. And I think Rachel can perhaps help you in the private session with some of the work that we're doing. I think I'll probably leave it at that. Is that
Thank
okay,
you.
Chair?
Our next question is from Trevor Clarke on the Muckamore Inquiry.
Chief, as we're all aware now, since we last met, the Muckamore Inquiry has obviously concluded and published its report. And put in record, obviously, I appreciate the difficulties the police had with any time that taken and the files they had to go through. But there was a particular recommendation 88, which obviously draws the police into it. And I'm wondering if you could tell me what it meant by suggest it needs a more structured approach to investigation file and the escalation processes and delays that are expected.
Yes, so firstly, Trevor, and I've met the team that investigated Muckamore and some of the victims. So when the public inquiry was announced, it was my understanding that for reasons of prejudice, it would not examine the ongoing investigation with regards to those vulnerable adults being subject to horrific abuse. I think it's quite possible that that recommendation is, as regards previous investigations, historical investigations that were conducted by the PSNI, potentially even before the Public Protection Branch was established. I'm reaching out to Tom Clarke, who I know, who is the author and chair of that inquiry, to establish the position. And I should say there is a significant amount of ongoing criminal justice activity. We've had a number of prosecutions through the magistrates' courts that have concluded, but the Crown Court cases have not concluded. There were 106 recommendations. There was one for the PSNI. And what I will say, that recommendation, I think, was about standards and reviews. And because of the systems we put in place that you've heard of previously from Davey with regards to public protection and our software capabilities now around niche, I think there should be a strong level of reassurance around the measures that have been put in place. And it's important, I say, that the families are incredibly supportive of the PSNI investigation into Muckamore. And I just want to pay tribute to the victims, the families, and the investigation team who have managed to do, I think, an exemplary job thus far, but we have outstanding criminal justice processes there.
Okay. Chair, I think it would be useful to put in record actually what the recommendation says. Well, the recommendation says the PSNI needs to improve its processes for the review of live investigation files and have an effective escalation process when progress is delayed. PSNI should consider how it assures the quality of the reviews of live investigation files, and senior officers should assess a significant sample of reviews to ensure all possible action has been taken to conclude the investigation, that delays are escalated promptly. I appreciate what you say that this may be bringing in other aspects. However, it is critical in the wording of this, which we can only conclude relates to Muckamore. There is a criticism in terms of how the investigation files are being conducted and the escalation. So I suppose as a board member, we would want an assurance that A, you're accepting this, and B, that there is something put in place to address it.
So my assurance to you is I'm going to speak to Tom Clarke to understand it and understand if it's about historical cases or the current investigation. The public inquiry was not to examine the current investigation because that would lead to prejudice, as I understand it. So we've reached out to establish that. And what I can tell you, and we'll do a written answer, that the various measures that are in place now, and we'll speak to Mr. Clarke about those, should allay fears with regards to the comments in that recommendation. But we will clarify that and come back to you, Trevor.
Thank you. Our next question is from Deirdre Hargey.
Thanks very much. And I suppose it's just covering the case of Jeffrey Donaldson without getting into the specifics of the case. But obviously, he was convicted last week of child sexual offences and rape. And as you say, Chief Constable, it's been down to the bravery of the victims who came forward that made the case responsible. And he is responsible for the crimes that he committed. But I think without talking about the case, there are wider issues that have come to light through the Spotlight programme, through other reporting as well, in terms of raising serious questions, which are of public interest and public confidence in terms of knowledge, prevention and safeguarding more widely. And I suppose it's the questions of who knew what, when they knew it, and what was done in terms of follow-up. And I suppose it's just for clarity around some of the assertions that were made that I know you had said, John, that the complaint was made in March 2024. But obviously on that programme, a safeguarding officer had said that police were aware. And indeed, there was a meeting that took place in March 2023, which involved a PSNI officer and obviously a safeguarding officer within a church setting. And that at that time, Jeffrey Donaldson then was identified. And I suppose it was just a question around, was the concerns at that stage a year before the arrest, were they escalated then to the senior management team or the Chief Constable? I'm conscious you weren't Chief Constable at that point, you come in later that year, but were those raised? I think the programme also pointed to two PSNI officers, obviously in serious crime branch, who were either working in MI5 or located there back in 2006, where they came across Jeffrey Donaldson in London at that point as well. And I know you had touched on that he wasn't under surveillance, but I would just like you to clarify that again. And is that from a PSNI perspective? Because I'm assuming you can't speak for British intelligence services. So again, I would like some clarity around that. If from your understanding, was he under surveillance then or at any time since 2006 up until his arrest? And I also would like to ask, was Jeffrey Donaldson, did he ever have close protection? And if so, at what period? And I think, as I say, there are questions, not just for police, but obviously in terms of safeguarding more widely. Will there be a point that the PSNI will set out a timeline of what was known and when it was known? Because I do think it is of public interest. And it's important that we all learn from safeguarding across the board. So I just think there are questions. You may have the answers to them, but I think it is important that they are answered. Thank you.
So I'm going to defer to the comments I made earlier. I'm not going to answer your questions today. There's a due process. There's a criminal justice process happening at the moment, and I'm not going to interfere with that. I know the Ombudsman put a line out, I think it was on Monday or Tuesday, about respecting the criminal justice process. I've said as much as I'm going to say today. I'm not going to answer questions about close protection. All of that would be inappropriate in this forum. There was no surveillance on him and there was no blackmail against him by the government. That's as far as I'm going to go today. I'm not going to add to this wild speculation and ridiculous commentary on this. It's not right for the victims. I've even commented in this forum about the victims' response to this. In the private session, I'm quite happy to have a further conversation about this. But until this process is finished, and of course there's a due process with regards to any complaints that people want to make about how the PSNI have conducted themselves, that can independently examine what we did and when. But I'm very confident, and I don't want to comment on the Spotlight programme because I think it was irresponsible to put out at that time. And I'm not going to comment on what retired officers have said. I don't understand why they've said it, but I'm not going to comment on it further than that. When it's the right time, And of course, a timeline, I'm very happy. You know my approach to candour and openness. There'll be nothing hidden from anybody that should be in the public domain. And certainly there'll be no shying away from anything that the PSNI have not or have done with regards to the Geoffrey Donaldson case. I have little surprise as to why some victims don't come forward. I just ask that we respect the court process until it's finished, and then there are mechanisms to deal with any concerns that have been raised. And at this stage, in this forum, that's not for now.
Thanks, sorry, just to get back to that, because with all due respect, Chief Constable, I mean, you've put out information yourself there saying that he wasn't under surveillance. So you have put out additional information. So I think a timeline when the process is over then would be useful, because I think there are questions that need answered in terms of what was the timeline, what was known, when was it known? And I suppose it's just that clarity. You're saying that he wasn't under surveillance. Are you speaking and confirming that on behalf of intelligence services, or is that on behalf of the PSNI? I think that clarity would be useful because you've put that out now. So I think it would be useful to have that now. Thanks.
I'm honestly not engaging with this. I'm not answering any more questions on this, Chair. I'm not speaking for anyone else, only me. And I'm not going to talk about this case until the criminal justice process is over.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to our next question, which is from Les Allamby on flags.
Chief Constable, it's that time of the year again. The recent amendment to the Terrorism Act gives PSNI some enhanced powers to remove paramilitary flags and banners, including where the person responsible can't be identified, and also an end to the requirement that you have to gather evidence for prosecution before you can remove flags and banners. So my question is, what is the PSNI approach to the new legislative powers that you have, and what difference do you think this will make in practice?
I was going to say for speed, I'm going to bring Ryan in. For speed, I'm going to bring Ryan in.
I'll try and make it brief. Thanks, Les.
Be succinct as my question, Ryan. There you go.
I will. Les, we're actively working through the new legislation to integrate it into our policy that you're aware of. Our approach will remain as it is, staged. So we'll assess cases when they're reported to us in terms of what's presented. Is there criminality? We'll work firstly to engage, and the duty very much still lies with landowners, statutory landowners. They have a duty to consider whether they need to take action in relation to public displays and the ongoing harm from them. And then, of course, we'll be considering our own duties in relation to it in light of the new legislation. It's probably as concise as I can be.
I'd probably respond, but I know there's a supplementary, so.
I'm going to bring in Peter McReynolds now, who has a question on the same issue.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ryan, for that succinct update. I suppose my question is as an East Belfast MLA. Probably best to describe East Belfast as drenched in flags at the moment. My inbox certainly is full of concern from residents across East Belfast. We've got as many flags as you could describe, from Union flags, which I appreciate isn't an offence, to other more sinister flags, which, living and working in East Belfast, I get the context behind why they've been put up and why they've been done so in a variety of different ways. I wanted to read you an email that I received from a constituent who I know well, and he said, in his frustration, at present, a few men with a set of ladders and some flags are running rings around the PSNI, DFI, and any other authority I can think of, making you all look powerless to run the country for the common good. I've paraphrased that slightly because he was a bit more frustrated than that. So within that context and sort of the concise update that you've given there, within the context of, I mean, I was sent an email just a few days ago that has UDA flags at the foot of Garnerville, close to the training college. I think whenever the assessor previously commented they were outside, they've been moved about a quarter of a mile, half a mile down the road. My impression is that within that context, the people who are putting up these flags, the range of flags, they're almost laughing at statutory bodies and the police because they know that they're not going to be taken down. I mean, there's been an FOI that I've received from DFI in recent days. You mentioned the landowner who owns the street furniture. DFI hasn't removed any flags in 24, 25, or within 26. So within that vacuum, I think public confidence in the police willing to step up, take down paramilitary flags, other types of flags, the public just think that there's no point in doing any of this. And I say this actually as an East Belfast MLA who's worked in East Belfast in politics for 9 years as an elected rep. I've never seen it as bad. And I think within that vacuum, the people who are willing to do this are putting two fingers up to all of us, and residents are just beyond exasperated, and they don't know what to do. So I suppose that's more of a comment, but I mean, is this going to change anything? Are those flags at Garnerville, near Garnerville, going to be taken down? There's ones on the King's Road. I can tell you all about them if you want to after this, because I'm not seeing anyone actually taking down flags.
Peter, I mean, I'll just reiterate what I've said. Our approach to these will and continue to be on a case-by-case basis. I'd say again that we stand ready to support statutory authorities if they are working through the process and their own duties and their quality duties and the things that they need to do in relation to reducing the ongoing harm from displays on their property or their street furniture, and that is something we're absolutely stand ready to work with them on that. So we will continue that, and in line with the policy sets out clearly how we go about that process.
Peter, the next question is from you as well on roads, please.
Thank you, Chair. I chair the all-party group on road safety in the Northern Ireland Assembly, so I'm keen to hear what the status, Chief Constable, is of the fixed and traffic light detection cameras across Northern Ireland.
Peter, also, just on the last question, if we can have a chat afterwards around some of your concerns specifically around the flags, that would be helpful. I've got Mark at the end of the table who's going to answer that question, if that's all right, Peter.
Chair Peter, thank you very much for the opportunity. We work with the Road Safety Partnership, as you're well aware, to operate a mixture of speed and red light cameras since 2023. The Road Safety Partnership made 87,000 detections last year, which was up 4% on 2024. In relation to the red light cameras and the fixed speed cameras that you speak of, we're engaged with the partnership in negotiating a new contract around their use and mechanisms. We have a strategy that will run to 2030, and we do acknowledge that there are issues in relation to the age and the servicing costs around the equipment, but we continue to discharge our duties in relation to road safety.
So are the cameras working?
The cameras, the systems that we operate, we have a system that is delivering over 87,000 responses and detections over the last year, and we are negotiating a contract that's ongoing.
Okay.
In relation to the status of each of those cameras, that would be a matter for a private question.
Private, so we can pick it up in the private session. So you would accept that there are a lot of the cameras that actually aren't working at the minute?
The position of the cameras at the minute is we do experience age and breakdown related issues, but we continue to operate with the Road Safety Partnership, a successful partnership which is delivering prosecutions.
And do we have a timeline for the new contract?
The contract is being negotiated at the minute, and we anticipate we'll start working on the average speed cameras this year and the other cameras to ensure that they're sustainable in the 26 to 30 period.
Okay. Yep, Peter.
Thank you. I think the chair's touched on it a bit there. My understanding is that there's presently 6 red light traffic cameras in Northern Ireland, and 3 fixed speed cameras, one of which is in East Belfast, which I think is the highest performing, receives the most detections, it's doing well though, receives the most detections. I have a fear that none of these are working, and that within that vacuum of no sort of deterrent, there's a deterrent there, but the technology is outdated. And I just fear from listening to your answer to the chair there, that it could be a number of years before we see any improvement. Do you have any sort of inclination as to how quickly we can get this negotiated and these cameras improved, upgraded, or whatever, enhanced, whatever the phrase may be? Because I mean, that's a major concern for me from a road safety perspective.
We're very aware of the concerns in relation to that and in relation to the cameras. The system, the negotiations that we're involved in at the minute is in relation to not just the operation of the cameras, but in terms of their service and maintenance. And that is a live partnership that is currently working successfully, and I'll be happy to discuss that with you afterwards or provide you with further information. The deterrent effect, though, is really important to us, and they continue to provide a deterrent effect in conjunction with the mobile systems that we use. And we have identified 90 sites across Northern Ireland where speeding and breach of traffic signals is an issue, and we continue to target those in all of our enforcement activity, both as the police service and in the partnership. So it is not a question that we are not dealing with issues in areas where we've identified road safety risks.
Okay, thank you. And our final question in this part of the meeting is from Trevor Clarke on Scarva.
Notwithstanding the rights, Chief Constable, of persons who want to make a protest, and in terms of those who actually also are exercising the rights in terms of the march, what we've seen, or what some of us witnessed in terms of social media, did look like a very large policing operation for what didn't look like a very large crowd of people. But in terms of the rights of those who are there to have a lawful protest, which was applied for and a location identified, what do you say to those who assembled on the day who were prevented from gathering in a location that was identified as a location for them to do their protest? And also, what would you say, would you suggest, and I appreciate actually some of your officers have met some of the team from my party or our party in relation to this, which has allayed their fears, I hope. But in terms of the role that they played as public representatives on that day, was there a suggestion that they inflamed it or diffused it?
Can I pass to Ryan? Is that right, Trevor? I might come in at the end. Ryan?
Yeah, thanks, Trevor. And I met with the local MP from the area, Carla, and your DUP MLA colleagues from the area and local councillor as well, off the back of Scarva event, and I'm hoping they found that a useful meeting. Yeah, it was a big policing operation. You'll remember the year before, there was disorder connected into the Parade for Palestine. There was spontaneous kind of protests and kind of violence as it went across the route. So it was one that we were worried about because of what had happened the year before. You may or may not be aware in the build-up to it, there was the parade notified, the procession notified. There was a notification around a protest. There was also a flute band locally had put in to do a sponsored walk at the same time to arrive in the village of Scarva at the same time as the other events that were happening. Scarva, you'll know well, is a small village with a road through the middle of it and a towpath going alongside. So it is a very compact area in which to undertake a policing operation within, and really quite isolated in terms of where it is. You'll also be aware, if you were following social media in the build-up to it, that the information and intelligence we were getting was saying that as I got closer to the day, particularly given in that week we'd removed the banner from Moygashel Play Park, Scarva was becoming a call for arms. There was plenty of social media posting asking people to come there to object to, protest against, and to stop the lawful procession that was happening within Scarva, particularly after the Parades Commission determination, which was just in the days leading up to it. So to summarise, we were really worried about it. We thought it was going to be violent. The intelligence we were getting and the social media posting that we saw did nothing to dissuade that, and the history of it the year before also suggested that that could be something that we would reasonably anticipate within that. So yes, it was a big policing operation to try and deal and mitigate all of those risks. You make the point, and absolutely understandably, about within the Parades Commission determination around the protest. They had indicated the bridge would be the place to protest. I'll invite anybody from the board or the public to go and look at that bridge in Scarva. we took an operational decision, which we're very entitled to do, that actually if people were on that bridge, they would be hands and arms length away from where the procession was going past, and giving everything that I said to you in terms of what we thought could happen that day. We did not feel that was a good idea. And we therefore had said to people, and we were on that bridge very early to stop people going on to it. You then saw a significant number, hundreds of people going to a disused or a building site area, which again was simply towpath across from where the procession was going by. And we tried to manage what was a crowd that, in our view, was getting more and more aggressive. We saw people picking up stones with a view, we think, to throw at the police and also to throw at the procession as it went past. So it was a tense, difficult situation that we were dealing with. Turning to your point in relation to your party colleagues, absolutely. In the meeting that we had, and when I spoke to our colleagues from PSNI working on the ground with them, they understood, your colleagues understood, that it was an ever more tense situation, and we're doing their absolute best to de-escalate that on the day. I've said that in the meeting, and I'm going to write with a number of the queries that have been raised from our engagement with Carla and the team around the day. And of course, we're a learning organisation. The point of that meeting was to hear their feedback, their perspective, and we'll take that on board when we're dealing with future operations in the village.
So thanks for that, Ryan. And I hear what you say in terms of you're entitled to make that decision, but did you make representation to the Parades Commission? Given we hear so many other parades where there's restrictions, and quite often the police will say there's nothing we can do, we're following the determination. In this case, there was a determination and you didn't follow it. So did you make representation to the Parades Commission in relation to that?
Trevor, when we speak to the Parades Commission, as you have rightly pointed out, we will police whatever the determinations are, and we'll make operational decisions based upon that. We made an operational decision on this case, and we actually went through it in some detail with your colleagues in that meeting as to why. I think they were understood the rationale for why we did it. They may not have agreed with our decision, but it was an operational policing decision to be taken, and one that we took.
Thank you. We're going to move on to the NCA report. Director General, thank you for your comprehensive report on the work of the NCA in Northern Ireland with some very notable successes, and invite you to make some opening remarks and then we'll move to questions.
Great, thank you, Chair. A real pleasure to be here again. I'll cover three areas, hopefully briefly, and then turn to questions. So first, how the threat picture, the serious and organised crime threat picture has changed kind of nationally rather than specifically in Northern Ireland. And then the picture in Northern Ireland, and then just a word on police reform, which was a government white paper announced since I was last here with you. So the threat picture overall, serious and organised crime, we assess has gone up in the last year, not significantly and not in every threat, but overall it has. We also assess this year, and for the first time, that technology is not only enabling crime, but driving it. The extent to which it dominates all of our lives has increased vulnerabilities and has provided new capabilities which criminals can exploit, and they are. So that's the very macro point. Drugs is worth pausing on. We are seeing drugs deaths continue to go up across the UK, almost 4,000 last year. We're seeing more cocaine on our streets, more deaths from cocaine, the price of cocaine reduce. I have spoken previously at this committee about how concerned we are about synthetic opioids. So, you know, fentanyl in the US, but it's been nitazines in the UK. That continues to be a real concern, but two positives on that. One, a UK-wide one. So the deaths from nitazines were down last year compared to the year before. So all the efforts that we have put in to try and staunch the flow and address any of the criminality we see really robustly and quickly seem to have had some effect. So kind of first positive. And then the second positive for Northern Ireland, actually the rate of nitazine consumption in Northern Ireland is lower. So we've had 1,000 deaths, over 1,000 deaths now in the UK since nitazines arrived in about 3 years ago. And only 13 of those have been in Northern Ireland. So one product that has not in a material way reached these shores. We have had some success in getting nitazines scheduled, so made illegal in China. So it's harder for them to be exported from China, the major source country. But what is happening instead is that the precursor chemicals for these synthetic opioids are being exported, and then they're being synthesized and created into the drugs in Europe or in the UK. So we're starting to see the emergence of drug laboratories. In the UK, we found 2 so far that are going to create these drugs. So that's something we are watching very hard. Organised immigration crime has been another really big challenge for us, largely manifesting in small boats coming over the English Channel into Kent, but obviously the common travel area is a vulnerability as well that I'm sure we'll pick up, and we have discussed earlier in the session. That's been our main effort over the last year to try and tackle organised immigration crime, and again, some successes. This is largely a crime that is taking place outside the UK, so we're having to work with international partners and disrupt overseas, which is just a bit more challenging. But last year we seized 533 boats or engines. So if those had all got to the French shores, that could have been another 30,000 people that came across. We have arrested numerous criminals involved in this, some in the UK and some right across Europe and into Africa and the Middle East. And we have seen some impact from that in the numbers coming across. So this calendar year to date, the arrivals in the UK, so but basically in Kent, are down 38%. So, I mean, the previous year was the highest ever. So that is nothing that we are kind of celebrating at the moment. It's still a very high number, but a reduction of 38% so far this year. As we do that, and we do have an absolute focus on the small boat crossings, the biggest flow and the most visible affront to our sovereignty, we are mindful of the different routes that people can come into the UK, which obviously includes the common travel area. So we can come back to that in questions. The third part of the overall threat I would just mention is online crime in its various manifestations. So cybercrime at the kind of highest end in terms of threats to organisations and the country. Ransomware continues to be a big challenge. We continue to see it hitting British companies, bits of the public sector. But it does seem to have stabilised a little, and we have had some real successes. So last week or the week before last, I forget now, we saw guilty pleas on a trial that was starting in London into 2 individuals who have now pled guilty to a big ransomware attack onto Transport for London. And the sentencing's not taken place yet, so that is continuing. So I won't say more about it now, but that's been a very significant moment for us. I've mentioned before to the board that the majority of ransomware that we see does come from Russian-speaking ransomware groups based in Russia or the former Soviet Union. But over the last year and a half, 2 years, as I've mentioned before, we are seeing more British-based or English-speaking cyber criminals, and these were 2 of those. So a significant moment for us. Online fraud, we should touch on 46% of reported crime in England and Wales. The stats will be very similar here. So really significant numbers. Now, a lot of that, I don't want to over-egg it, is attempts to defraud someone that were not successful, or defraud for a relatively small amount of money that the company or the website or the bank has refunded. But you are still talking about close to 1 million people who have had significant amounts of money defrauded from them, sometimes life-changing. So a really important issue. Been a big focus of effort to try and get the law enforcement system, and not just the law enforcement system, but the financial sector, the tech sector, the telco sector, to be better at addressing that. And I am seeing real progress on that at the moment. So we think our own activity to prevent crime resulted in 400,000 frauds being prevented last year. We are seeing across the UK the number of convictions on fraud going up, so 27% increase last year. And we're seeing better cooperation with not just the financial sector, but also the tech sector. There's a lot further to go on that. I don't want to over-egg that too, but we are seeing the likes of Google and Meta sharing information and data with us that we were able to use to identify fraud gangs and then take action. Often that's overseas, and so the international cooperation is also really important. One focus of that at the moment is fraud scam compounds, I mean, frankly, almost cities in ungoverned parts of Southeast Asia. You may have seen that reported in the media, but that is hitting worldwide now, the frauds that are being orchestrated from there. So a big joint international effort with those countries to the extent they can impose their jurisdiction over them, but with the US, with countries in the region. I had the Five Eyes law enforcement partners in London the week before last, and that was one of our topics, was how we could better work together to tackle that. Child sexual abuse, another major online crime, and we've discussed at the board many times before. It goes back to Linda's point earlier on about the displacement of people away from public protection into to kind of policing the streets. Remains a really significant challenge for us and continues to grow. So I've talked before about the referrals we get in from tech companies of suspected child sexual abuse. They just continue to go up. So last year we had over 90,000 referrals from tech companies of material or conversations they had spotted on their systems that they thought were criminal, that they referred on to the UK. We look at those really closely. In the previous 6-month period, we passed 444 of those to PSNI, but that's a small part of the total load that is hitting the UK, and it continues to go up. So last week alone, we got 3,300 referrals from tech companies of suspected child sexual abuse. So this is a huge challenge that is with us at the moment, but absolutely with forces, because we're looking at that information, we're trying to enhance it to try and identify a location. We then pass it on to the relevant police force. As I said, 444 in the last 6-month period to PSNI. Those are individual cases that need to be pursued to try and identify a perpetrator, to identify a child who might be at risk and safeguard them. So that is a big load and responsibility on PSNI. The answer to this, in my view, has to be to try and stop the flow in the first place. We obviously want to be arresting perpetrators. We want to be looking after victims once they have been victimised, and we are doing that. 1,000 arrests a month across the UK of child sexual offenders, but much better to stop it happening in the first place. A lot of this is enabled to happen in the online world. And so one thing we have been doing is working very closely with Ofcom, the regulator of this, with the tech companies themselves, and also with the government to think about the changes that need to be made to deal with this better. And part of the result of that, and obviously many other people and organisations fed into this, but was the UK government's announcement a few weeks ago that they're going to introduce a ban on under-16s use of social media. We think that's a very positive thing. I set out in a press conference and speech a few weeks before the dangerous features that do exist on social media. I won't go into it now, I'll save it for questions if you want to cover it in more detail, that enable the child sexual abuse to take place and that need to be dealt with. So it's good to see progress on that. It is hugely important. The final area of crime I just wanted to cover, which is not about children actually, but about adult women, is the emergence, certainly for us to be able to see for the first time, of organised drug-facilitated sexual assault. So just to explain what that means, you are all familiar with spiking, so people putting drugs into someone's glass in a pub. They are drugged and therefore and then taken elsewhere and sexually assaulted. What we're now seeing happen more is those drugs being used on someone's partner, and for then that partner to be raped without their consent, and frankly may never know it's happened. And this is a pattern of abuse that can continue for years and indeed decades. Now, we saw that very famously in France with the Giselle Pellicot case. We have now got examples of that having taken place in the UK. There was a case in Manchester reporting restrictions were lifted on it last week of one individual, one woman who's obviously anonymous, and I think either 12 or 14 individuals who have been charged with raping her. So, I mean, just an extraordinary. kind of crime to take place. And the point I'm making here is that is dreadful, but also it is not exceptional. We are seeing more of that happening now. And the online element is that people are getting together in online groups to share tactics, methodologies, what drugs to use, and then sharing images of it happening. So we'll be saying more about that in public and making sure that the public are aware of this, and also that we're putting all the right measures in place, obviously across law enforcement so that we know what to look for, but also GPs, pharmacies, and tech companies to try and make sure that we are really dealing with this as well as we can. So that's the threat picture. I'll be briefer on the other two, Chair. So our work particularly in or with Northern Ireland is set out in the report I've sent you. We sent that to you fairly quickly after the end of the 6-month period. There's always a bit of a lag on our disruption data coming in. So the figures have changed slightly since the overall figures that are in the report. So the report had said there were 148 disruptions in the last 6-month period. It's now 164, so it's gone up a bit further. And actually there's one tweak to the highest impact disruptions where we had reported there were 8. One of them we've actually recategorized into a support disruption, so it comes out of that category, goes into another. So we had 7 of the highest impact disruptions. But overall, 164 is a 20% increase on the previous, on the 3-year average. So we are seeing a steady trajectory of improvement. To break it down a bit or just comment on it, we are seeing more. We've had more successes, particularly in the high impact areas with money laundering, and I can go into that in questions if you want, but there's some important cases there, albeit some of them are ongoing, so there'll be a limit to what I can say here. You'll have seen, I know some of you have commented on the reduction in drug cases. Now, this is largely due to fewer border referrals. So this is the lower level drug cases we're dealing with when someone's trying to bring cannabis in at the airport, at which point we will pick it up and investigate it. If those are going down, that's a good thing. There's less coming in, less being spotted. And frankly, this is the lower level type of case that we would want to be investigating anyway. We want to be going after the more major imports, the more major groups who are orchestrating it. So I don't see that reduction as a problem, actually. In a way, it's a good thing. And we've seen increases in the child sexual abuse and cyber disruptions that we've had. Some of those are in Northern Ireland. The vast majority are actions we've taken to reduce the threats globally, kind of in the UK and globally. And again, in questions, I can explain a bit more what those are. In terms of our response, the other point I just wanted to mention was asset recovery and the paramilitary crime task force and our involvement in that. And we've got a pretty strong pipeline of cases now that are looking at this. We've had there were 2 disclosure orders that we got through court in January, a property freezing order in December, and we've got a whole series of other cases that are already in hand or will shortly come to court. We have 2 in development that will look to put disclosure orders and possibly freezing orders into, in one case, almost $1 million, in another $500,000. So some quite significant work that will play out in time. It is an area where we have to be patient, because these cases, civil recovery cases, always take quite a long time in court. I've skated through it. I'm happy to cover more in questions. The final thing I said I'd cover was police reform. So the UK government published its police reform white paper towards the end of January. Now, this is largely affecting England and Wales, but there is obviously a Northern Ireland dimension to it. But just briefly, the big picture for England and Wales is first that the government has decided it wants to create a new national police service, which will be a body with 4 functions: strategic, kind of direction, setting standards, professional standards for policing. Thirdly, providing a series of enabling capabilities for policing in the round and doing that more efficiently, centrally once. And then fourthly, which is the bit that's kind of relevant to both the National Crime Agency and therefore Northern Ireland, operational. So on the operational side, the NCA is due to go into this National Police Service, as is counter-terrorism policing, as are the regional organised crime units in England and Wales. So the idea is to create a single, much more powerful federal law enforcement organisation that can deal with all the crimes that are best dealt with nationally. And that is an ambition I support. It will see the end to my organisation in its current form, but actually I think it is the right path for the future for the UK. There are a whole series of other things happening, but they include most, publicly and politically, a review looking at the number of police forces in England and Wales, not in Scotland and Northern Ireland, which Lord Hogan Howe is leading, but with the idea of significantly reducing the current 43 to a yet to be determined but much smaller number. Obviously, the bit that is particularly relevant to Northern Ireland is that the NCA works in Northern Ireland, unlike the rest of policing. We would want to continue with the National Police Service in broadly the same way we have now. So we would need to have the authorisation of the Northern Ireland Assembly. We would need to have an MOU with both NIPB and PSNI, as we do now. We would need to respect the arrangements that exist here that are devolved. We think that would offer a more powerful organisation to be more supportive and helpful to the people of Northern Ireland, as it would to England and Wales. The detail of that is it's a Home Office lead, obviously. They're the policy department leading on this, and they'll be working with the Ministry of Justice and with PSNI. But to the extent I can, I'm happy to kind of elaborate or answer any further questions on it. Chair, I'll pause there and hand over to questions.
Thank you, Graham, for those opening remarks. Our first question is from Colin McGrath.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Graham, for the report. It's good to get the biannual update from the NCA and your work here and an opportunity to ask some questions on it. The question I wanted to maybe start with was in reference to the co-location between yourselves and the PSNI in terms of some of your work. That, as I understand, is something that did happen previously and now doesn't. Feeling a little bit awkward here. It feels like talking to a divorced couple. You're sitting beside each other. One wants you to actually be together. The other one doesn't. Is there any explanation as to why you don't want to co-locate as part of your work with your colleague beside you? And then maybe we could ask the same question of your colleague who wants to.
I'm still reeling from the revelation of our marital state. Just to clarify the position a bit, so we are a strong and committed partner in the paramilitary crime task force. I mean, I think our biggest issue and question there is the continuation of funding for that beyond the end of this financial year, which is the thing we should really focus on. Just to put a nuance into it, so we are still co-located with a paramilitary crime task force, so our civil recovery team, I talked about some of the work they are doing, is still working on PSNI estate with PSNI in the paramilitary crime task force. What you're referring to, though, is that we did take out, just physically, some of our investigations and intelligence officers that used to work there. That happened about 18 months ago, and that was at the point, it was because the budget that was allocated to the paramilitary crime task force from HM government and the Northern Ireland Executive reduced. And so we collectively had to cut our cloth on that, which was a joint decision between PSNI and the NCA about how to do that. And we felt that the best thing, the least worst thing to reduce was the investigators and intelligence officers from the NCA that sat there. So they have gone back to our main kind of site in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, and they are still available to work with the paramilitary crime task force. I mean, they're doing other things as well, but we are still working and very committed to the paramilitary crime task force. So not at all divorced, still very happily married. But David, did you want to add on that?
Yeah, I think that covers it very well in terms of the main issue here is funding, and the context of that letter was a letter to the Home Office that is an opportunity to emphasise that there are greater opportunities the more we can co-locate, we can bring all our people together and therefore work collectively together. So it was an opportunity to highlight the desire both within NCA and ourselves to maximise that co-location if and when the funding is available to do that. But the letter also highlights the very good work, the close working relationship and the support that is provided by the NCA to us, both in terms of the PCTF and indeed other areas of crime. And it also highlights within that letter the alignment around the 5 themes that the NCA have brought forward in terms of their strategy over the next number of years. And they align very well in terms of our service priorities, which are in essence serious and organised crime, which cover many of the issues that Graham has talked about around online crime, drugs, etc. Our service priorities also cover our response to vulnerability, primarily violence against women and girls and children, domestic violence, hate crime, and child criminal exploitation. Again, many of the issues that Graham has touched on and spoken about this morning, and also around terrorism as well. And that's not just Northern Ireland related terrorism, it's much wider than that in terms of extreme right wing, counter-state terrorism, etc. Again, some of the threats that impact on Northern Ireland and the UK more generally.
Can I come in quickly, Colin? Only because you obviously look towards me. It feels like we're at relate now a little bit, but so it is about funding. We lost COVID, changed the world. We lost a number of the everyone went to work from home. We never got back to the numbers that we had co-located and working against paramilitaries. We have a budget of 5.7 million PCTF funding. That finishes this year, or there's no guarantee beyond the end of 26-27 for that money. Obviously, we're hoping that there will be a continuance of that funding, but the funding has come down and it's not been what we wanted. So in January of last year, we went from 3 teams to 2. So that's investigation teams. So there are some challenges here that we're just trying to highlight to say we've got enough difficulties with regards to the spread of responsibilities here. We're just trying to make sure that we provide the best possible response that we can to such a difficult challenge around paramilitaries. And we know from the earlier conversation that is a difficult challenge. Okay.
Yeah, maybe just to come back to that, but first of all, I admire and support how you can get it all down to budgets and that there's not enough money, and we need to keep banging that drum about getting extra funding in for the police, so support that entirely. Can I just maybe ask for just a further explanation, because I don't understand the bit of if you've got less funding, it means that you need to kind of withdraw and go back into your own bases. Surely if you're less funding, actually pulling the resources together is a way of reducing. Yeah. How is it that you reduce your costs by separating out and then having 2 services which kind of have got the same strategic outcomes?
So no, because we are reducing the input too, and sorry if I wasn't clear. So we had 2 types of people in the paramilitary crime task force: civil recovery investigators going after the money. I talked about some of those cases. They are still doing that work and they are still co-located. So that stayed, but the budget reduced. And so we stopped the people who were doing it working on that work full time. And as a result, they moved away from that site.
Okay.
So but they have actually, I mean, it goes to John's point about 3 teams down to 2. We have reduced the number of people who are full time working on the paramilitary crime task force. The bit that I would have kind of misled you on in a way, and not intentionally, was they are still available to help on all this work. They are investigators, intelligence officers based in Northern Ireland, working on our broader casework. So if there is an investigation that we're doing that we need to surge more people into, they are available to help with that. So they haven't gone and are doing nothing, completely irrelevant stuff, but they are no longer in the paramilitary crime task force wherever they're sitting.
Okay. That's great. I want to talk to you in the private section more about the numbers and how many there are and what they're doing, but I don't think that's for a public discussion. But thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Colin. And our next question is from Gerry Kelly.
It's just to add that you've probably answered most of this, Graham, in fairness to you. But just to be clear, so the NCA are being subsumed into the policing service, the National Policing Service. Does that mean they cease to exist? You just become a part of that, or because you were also saying the NCA will be working here? So what we're talking about is that the NPS will be coming here. Okay, and then the other part of it is, so what else is subsumed? The CTP, and is there other organisations? Is that it?
Yeah. So yes. Now, this is not happening immediately. So we expect legislation.
That's where the time frame is. Really.
Yeah. So we expect. I am expecting legislation to come into Westminster Parliament in the autumn, and that will provide more clarity. But even then, I think will be relatively high level. I'm then expecting, and the white paper says this, that the National Police Service will be set up in phases, and the operational part. I said there were kind of 4 functions it would have. The operational part will be the last of those, because we have said as operational leaders, and the government has agreed, that we need to be careful not to take any operational risk, or not undue operational risk in the transition. And we need to make sure that the National Police Service is kind of load bearing, well set up and functioning before we move it in. So we don't have a date on that, but I would be surprised if that was before 2029 or 2030 when the NCA would move in. But at that point, absolutely, there would no longer be a legal entity called the National Crime Agency, and it would be part of the National Police Service. So we will have to go through a negotiation and the Northern Ireland Assembly to establish the rules of the road and the extent to which and in what matters the National Police Service can operate with PSNI in Northern Ireland.
And that's my next question, because so that negotiation or whatever, I don't know if it's already started or not, but that will be with the executive, the assembly, in the first place, and I presume with the police as well. But, it's not NCA, sorry, it's not NCA who'll be doing that. It'll be the new organisation, yeah.
So if I can just come in here. So the Home Office have been in touch with the Department of Justice and ourselves. So we're in the with foothills of this. We've got a document around the suggested legislation. Graham's mentioned the time frame, which I think is going to be September for the legislation, but there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment at government at Westminster and how parliamentary time will be used. But I think September is when the legislation is expected to go through Parliament. I would expect it to get Royal Assent next summer if that does happen. And I had a call only this week with the Home Office around the prospective legislation, which I think pretty much mirrors the current legislation that allows us to work with the NCA. There's nothing different to it. I think if there is a need for anything different, there'll be a discussion about that. None of that would happen without going through the Department of Justice, the executive. That's the sort of docking in part. And unlike England and Wales, where the National Police Service and the Commissioner, whoever heads the National Police Service with the Commissioner, can direct policing, it will be the same arrangements here. It will only be by consent that we work with them. So it will be effectively a mirror at the moment, that's the suggestion on the draft, of the legal arrangements that are in place with the NCA. And Graham's timeframe, I understand that it's likely to be 2029 or beyond when the NCA and counter-terrorism policing are consumed by this new body. It will take National Police Chiefs Council, the body of chief officers, that will go in there. College of Policing, lots of entities that currently exist will go in there, but the operational arm will go in later when it's properly established and able to take them in. That's the trajectory, but all subject to discussion and debate.
That's very helpful. And so the other question probably isn't able to be answered, but at the moment what you're doing is a biannual, twice a year sort of covenant until is, so that is something which is being discussed in the new organisation and what way that'll happen as well. Yeah. But as we are sitting, it's the same how do you describe it? It's the same arrangement, only with a different organisation, obviously a more powerful organisation then. Okay. That's fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Les Allamby.
Thank you, Chair. Graham, you mentioned in passing the CTA, and I was very conscious that neither the NCA strategic assessment of serious and organised crime nor the annual plan made any reference to issues arising from the common travel area. And while I'm cognizant of the substantial benefits of the CTA, I wonder if you'd say a bit more about what are the risks and how they're being managed.
Sure, thanks, Les. I mean, it's clearly a really important issue. So, I mean, the assessment, and Colin's raised this as well, we do an awful lot of assessments every year, about 80, and all but one of them are classified, and therefore operational partners, they help shape how we respond to the threat. One of them is just a high-level summary for the effectively for the public. And this year we took a slightly different approach to it that was less individual threat focused and more domain focused. We're just trying to do it a bit differently to try and see crime in a different way. And it didn't mention the common travel area, but we mentioned that a lot in all of our other assessments. We did an assessment last year purely on the common travel area, with PSNI, working with the Irish as well, to make sure we really understood this. I know the Home Office, who house immigration enforcement, have worked with their Irish colleagues as well to do an assessment on the broader issues. I mean, we focus on serious and organised crime. They're looking at migration and the use of the CTA in the round. They've done an assessment too internally. So this does get a lot of attention, and obviously recent events have kind of highlighted the importance of that even more. So we do look at it, and we look at it together with lots of different partners. Then addressing it, I mean, this is clearly, well, what is our assessment of the threat? Obviously, people, commodities can move over the common travel area in a way that is harder than in a border that is policed like the rest of the UK border. Since Brexit, we have seen more ferry routes and some flight routes going into Ireland, and that increases the vulnerability or increase the scope for criminals to be able to use that as well. We haven't seen a significant increase in the extent to which it has been abused, but of course we don't have checks on the border, so that is an intelligence-based assessment in terms of what we are seizing and what we are seeing. Or at least no greater an increase through the CTA than we are seeing through all of our other ports and borders. We've got a number of different measures in place to manage it. So kind of multi-agency hub based in Liverpool called Causeway, which has got representatives from PSNI, NCA, the Guards, Immigration Enforcement, Border Force, who are looking at that intelligence picture all the time and working out how we target it. And that is essentially then the basis for which we target it. So rather than having Border Force officers on the border kind of checking things as they come through, we've got an intelligence-led approach to it. And we will try and address things either in Ireland at the port of entry into Ireland, or as they leave Northern Ireland or arrive in mainland GB. But Dave, you might want to add to that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to, sorry. Time is against us and I'm just conscious to try and get through the questions. Tommy, you're
happy to pick it up in
the private session if that's okay. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your report, and thank you. Rightly highlight the important work being undertaken by the NCA in conjunction with PSNI in the area of child sex abuse. Okay, but in your report, you highlight the difference in national trends, and in particular that in Northern Ireland, 25% of the NCA disruptions, right, relate to child sex abuse, while in GB that's only 15%. So would you care to comment as to the reasons for that difference? And secondly, would you also give update the board some information on the nature of those disruptions that are taking place in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, so it's more a statistical anomaly. So when we do a pursuit disruption, so an arrest of an individual, that will be location specific. And those are broadly equivalent across Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. When we are looking at what we call 3P disruptions, the kind of protect, prepare, prevent, then often they have a kind of a national UK-wide impact. And so they will also be relevant to Northern Ireland. So when you then look at the stats, it underplays the pursued disruptions and it increases the 3P ones, and therefore it looks like there's more. And we get that on cyber as well as child sexual abuse. So I wouldn't read too much into it, just the way the statistics come. In terms of the type of things that are in there, so what's not included actually, is again a weird statistical anomaly, is the disseminations that we pass over to Northern Ireland that come in through the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children in the US and our Child Sexual Exploitation Referral Bureau. So the 90,000 a year, the 444 in the last 6 months that came in into PSNI. What it does include is more specific intelligence we have got through other sources that have enabled the safeguarding of a victim or an arrest of an offender in Northern Ireland. It includes extradition, so we lead effectively on extradition, so someone being arrested and extradited from Northern Ireland or back into Northern Ireland from another country. And so in the last 6 month period, for example, we enabled the extradition of someone from Northern Ireland back into the Republic of Ireland where they were wanted for a child sexual offence. So that's in there. We have put out, so we'd also include the major communication activity we do to try and help children protect themselves and adults protect their children. And so we did 2 big pushes on that last year, one on financially motivated sexual extortion, so sextortion, and that was disseminated around by Safeguarding Board Northern Ireland, and another on the COM network, so the sadistic exploitation groups. So again, informing parents and schools and enabling them to work with their children. Also, the educational materials we provide on more traditional child sexual abuse into children, so updating and promulgating those so that schools can use them. and then the work we do with tech companies or Ofcom. So Ofcom have a massively important role, really, really important under the Online Safety Act. They can only act on the basis of evidence of real information. And the people who will see most of that real information, particularly when it comes to child sexual abuse, will be us. So we have to gather that information and put it into a usable product so that Ofcom then you can then use it with the individual companies to require them to change their systems. So that's the kind of activity that we are taking and that is included in all of those statistics. Some of it with a UK impact, some of it very specific to Northern Ireland.
Thank you for that. Maybe just one supplementary question. In your report, you also reference Operation Beacon Port, right, which is reviewing cases which police forces or CPS in England and Wales have made a decision to close investigations into group-based child sexual abuse, exploitation between 2010 to 25. Whilst I appreciate it's still work in progress, can you confirm that there have been any referrals to the Operation Beacon Port team from PSNI?
And this came out of the inquiry that the UK government commissioned Louise Casey to do on grooming gangs in England and Wales. And the recommendations were for the government in terms of England and Wales, not for Scotland and Northern Ireland. But the government asked us to lead with working with policing this work. So exactly as you said, to look at cases that had been no further actioned between 2010 and 2025 and consider whether there had been lines of investigation or inquiry that had not been followed. Given we are a UK organisation, we didn't want to just work with the England and Wales forces on this. We wanted to engage with Scotland and Northern Ireland. So we've absolutely done that through Davy and other teams. But that's a kind of optional thing that we need to negotiate and work through with each of those two forces. But there have been meetings with Davy. He can kind of elaborate on that to work out exactly how PSNI want to engage. But essentially, we're doing a massive data gathering exercise. So what are all the cases across the UK effectively? Everyone is on board, so that we have that data picture, that we can understand it. And then we can run a process on those cases. And, this will be tens of thousands of cases over a 15-year period, and identify those which merit further work. So we'll collect the data, analyze it, specifically do the triage, and then we will typically be saying, and we think there is more work to be done here, we'll hand it back to the force for that to happen. That's happened in 9 cases so far. So, we're in the foothills of doing this. It's kind of UK-wide. There will be an awful lot more to go through. None so far for Northern Ireland. We're still working out exactly how it's going to work. But David, do you want to?
Yeah, and just to reassure, we're certainly connected in, and we are reviewing the cases. We have initiated the review as phase 1, part of phase 1 of the operation, with the fixed criteria that NCA has applied to this. That has not uncovered any cases that require that referral. We're now working on the bigger piece, which is phase 2, and we're plugged in and linked in with Graham and the team. There are some issues around just ensuring that we are utilising the same software, etc., and ensuring that we can upload the cases to the NCA systems around that, and that's the work that's ongoing at the moment.
Just final confirmation around that, Davy. That's very much PSNI. PPS, are they also involved in that process, given that CPS are involved in England and Wales?
At this point, not so. When we get to the point of actually identifying cases that warrant that further investigation, it's at that point then you would engage the PPS and the considerations around next steps.
The extra bit on that is, obviously, if we have a new case, then the CPS or the PPS will need to look at it. But sometimes the decision not to prosecute was by the CPS or the PPS. And that's, of course, an independent prosecutorial decision. So not for us to kind of review whether they got it right. So there's a little bit of careful organisational management to make sure that we do all of this, but we do it in a way that is not stepping on the statutory responsibilities of different organisations.
Thank you. Peter, did you want any further? No. Okay, thank you. That completes the questions. It's been a long session. We've covered a lot of ground, so time to draw breath, I think. I opened today's meeting referencing some of the worst racist violence and civil disorder Northern Ireland has seen. Chief Constable, so did you in your opening remarks. It was 3 weeks ago. By next week, it will start to become a distant memory, except for those individuals, families and communities who experienced it. And this is the third year in a row that this racist violence has happened. Chief Constable, as you have said, this is a societal issue. So the board would call on those with influence, politicians, civic, community and faith leaders to redouble their efforts to ensure that this senseless violence does not return. And of course, the question is, does policing have a role in supporting community cohesion? Or is its role simply to keep a lid on the violence when community cohesion fractures and hatred emerges? I had the privilege to attend the recent Neighbourhood Policing Conference, which for me reinforced the importance and the benefit of officers working at the heart of communities. And indeed, some of those officers were formally recognised in the recent honours for the difference that they have made. When neighbourhood policing is strong, communities feel seen, they feel heard, they feel protected, and they feel that policing is something done with them, not to them. These are the foundations of legitimacy, community confidence, and long-term community safety, and potentially also supports the securing of a police service which is representative of the diverse community which it serves. And yet, our neighbourhood officer cohort in Northern Ireland stands at just 320 officers against a target complement of 900. It begs the question, in the maelstrom of delivering effective policing with greatly reduced and limited resources, has sufficient weight been given to the importance of neighbourhood policing? The numbers would suggest that neighbourhood policing has been disproportionately cut back. This is just one of the issues to discuss in this, the 25-year anniversary of the formation of the Police Service of Northern Ireland. And the 25-year provides us with the opportunity to reflect and refocus on the patent vision for policing, which had community policing at its heart. Chief Constable, Director General, I thank you for your answers to the questions today. My thanks to those who joined us in James House, those who joined us online. That concludes today's session, and our next scheduled board meeting is Thursday, the 3rd of September.